So just giving a kind of heads up in case you're wondering what is the itinerary like, or if you didn't read through, you just sign up because you like to travel. But I want to make sure that everyone has the information about what's happening, so you don't feel so lost. Yeah. So this week I'm saying this only for the 7 days from Paris to Paris. Of course, we will continue onwards the next day as well after going back to Paris. But I'm talking about this route going in a circle. Okay. So first day, driving all the way from Paris to Lucerne. Okay, so this is one of the longest days we do, about 650 kilometers in total. Okay, that's why it takes so long to get to Lucerne. Um, so we drove all the way from Paris, and we're going through some regions of France. Okay, so France is very big. It's one of the largest countries by area of the European Union, and we're driving through this highway. Okay, the A6. You can see the sign on the side of the road, A6. Okay, so the A6 will take us almost all the way down to Basel. Basel is on the border of Switzerland. So now these regions we're going through are also very historic parts of France. Each region of France have very distinct, unique features about it. Okay, so as you can look outside the window and you see, mostly is land covered for agriculture. So most of the land is used for agriculture in France. So France is a big producer of some of the products that you might already heard about, like wine, yeah, cheese and ham. So those things are like one of the staples of the French cuisine, of the French kitchen. So this region we're going through is the area of, it's two areas we're touching today. One of them is Burgundy. Okay, Burgundy. It's a place for producing wine. So this is a very famous wine region. Okay, some of the most famous vintages come from here of this region. Okay, we're not going to see much of these wine yards, like where they create the wine, because it's off the track. But since the Roman times, the Romans were the first to start cultivating the grapes for the wine. Okay, so that was introduced about 2,000 years ago. Imagine that. So 2,000 years of history of wine making in some of these regions. So it's a very popular way. If you're really interested in the French culture, I would not recommend going to Paris. Paris is a different world altogether, and the French countryside is where life is, basically. So that's where you find the most unique architecture, and each smaller part of these regions have something unique about it. Okay, so we're driving through this area of Burgundy, and we're going to pass by the city of Dijon. Dijon is famous for mustard. Yes, I heard someone say mustard. So Dijon mustard is one of the staple foods of the region. So if you like the cheese, normally you eat it with mustard on it. It's very, very nice with white wine. Okay, so they produce white and red wine in the region. Okay, and so actually many of the regions have different, distinct, unique characteristics for making wine. And so this area which you go through is called Burgundy. It's a name, is a very old name, because Burgundy used to be a very famous duchy. Okay, so this were the dukes of Burgundy prospered, and that's in the time of the 13th, 14th century. That was the peak of this Burgundian empire, I would say empire, but it's a small kingdom basically. They also including Flanders and the Netherlands. So they were always fighting to dominate the region, and they were not part of France back then. So France, as we see today as a unified country, it took many centuries to become as one nation, I would say nation, because now as France is one people of French people, but each region has their own unique peoples. So each region have also different traditions, different clothing and so on, but now more and more as we became industrial country, most people live in the same kind of way, but small towns also exist still, but mostly is touristic places. So if you can, if you have a map of France where you see where we're going through now, in this area, it's very close. As we're driving down this road, we're getting closer and closer to the area which is close to the border of Germany. So the next door neighbor to the east is Germany. So there used to be a lot of fighting between the French and the Germans throughout the history, from the medieval ages all the way up to the end of the Second World War. Okay, and important things to mention: the wars between the French and the Germans also happened in the Napoleonic Wars, and after, in the First World War, this region was the mostly brutal fighting in this area. Okay, later on we're getting closer to these areas like Verdun. Verdun is one of the most famous because they built a fortress so to protect the heart of France from the invaded Germans. But in the First World War, more than 1 million soldiers died in that battlefield. So the Germans did not succeed in destroying Verdun, but they call it the bloodbath of Verdun because thousands of soldiers died there every day in the First World War. And actually the Germans were only about 3 miles away from capturing the city. But they did not succeed. At the end of the war, they gave up and left. Because First World War, which is the most important for this region, many things were destroyed by the Germans. Many small towns wiped off the earth, so they don't exist anymore. But some of the places survived and they rebuilt or restored these towns, these cities. So most of these smaller cities, they still maintain the old ways, the different architecture styles from different eras. But in Europe, as you will see, the most distinct buildings that you can always find in Italy as well as in France are the buildings of the church. Okay, so the church in the medieval times were the first organized builders of different monasteries. Okay, also in this region you have the monastery of Cluny and Fontenay. Those are the most famous medieval centers for the church. Okay, so and I'm not saying the Catholic Church because in that time period all these new monastery orders came to being, and they had their own governance basically. And so you heard of monks, right? So the monks were basically the first people to connect civilization through paper writing, so teaching as well. So the first places to teach reading and writing were by the monks, and the monks were also kind of like self-dependent, so they relied on their own trade, crafting, etc. So most of the towns, cities that grew out from those areas which were run by the monks, later on becoming bigger cities. Okay, so even Paris or any other city that you can still see today, where normally had foundation something to do with the church. Okay, so the church wasn't just a place where you go to worship at the weekends. They were having also political and economical power. And so in France also that created the society throughout the Middle Ages and so on until the Age of Enlightenment. In France, the majority of the cultures were influenced by religion. Okay, and so writing and reading was only the power of the clergy and the monks. And also monks produced not just books, they produced also cheese. One of the first places where they produced iron works, they're working with iron, making weapons, tools, etc. They were the first ones actually by the monks of Fontenay. Fontenay is a very famous place, still standing today, but very different from what you would expect. Not so grandiose buildings they built. It's most like a very simplistic. Okay, so why I'm saying this is because you have to understand that in a time period, the church was corrupted by greed, and the popes were building palaces for themselves and not living like real Christians, simple life. So they were not showing the good example for the practitioners of the faith. So some of these orders came to being, like the monks that created like their separate place, just so they would be like the Franciscan order. The Franciscan order is one of the most prominent in the history of medieval times, because they kind of were living through like ascetic lives. So like they give up on earthly pleasures, eating simple and working hard, and praying many times in the day, doing meditation and prayers 5-6 times a day, and living in very small quarters and very simple. So they were very opposite to what the Rome clergy was doing at that time. And so this affected also the religion in a way, and also the people and the culture around them. So yeah, that's some interesting facts about what was going on back in the old days in this region. Now most of these places are visited by tourists every year. So for those who are more interested in the aspect of seeing what the medieval French areas look like, that's more like it. So in Paris, as we will see later on, also we're visiting Paris in our trip, it is a very different world. If you come inside Paris, it's like a different city, a different mentality, different people. As in the countryside also, people change, and each region people are different. If you go to South France, as we will do at the after leaving Italy, we go down to the French Riviera. You also see very different people, different lifestyle, more beach life, and then here mostly rural farming people and living off the land. Okay, but there is not so many people actually who live in these little towns. But some people who don't like the cities, they retain the old-fashioned way of living, farming, producing cheese and different produce grains and so on. There's a lot of good stuff for the French food that comes from these different areas of France. Okay, so today's France is very different from back in the old days, because as you see, they are one of the most developed countries of the European Union. Okay, so as you all know, in here they are using the currency, the euros. Okay, so they only accept euros. So the whole trip, actually, because we're going to places, except for Switzerland, they have the same currency in this, we call it the Eurozone, as we are traveling in the European Union, except for Switzerland. The Swiss use a different currency, the Swiss francs. But you don't need to worry about it, because if you want to buy something, just use a card. So easiest way to do it. Don't worry about it. So Swiss francs is different from the euros. Okay, so it's a price difference. I'm not sure how much it is. I will check for you later what's the current rate now. But normally the euro is a bit stronger currency than the Swiss francs. So throughout the trip, don't worry about the money. Just you need euros for most cases. Okay. So yeah, France is one of the founders of the European Union. Before it was just an economical union between some of the member states that exist today, with Germany, with the Netherlands, with Luxembourg. They formed a kind of alliance for allowing easier free trade. So that was the first kind of political union that they started, and then developing into something more interesting and more difficult to probably handle. But this we call it the European Union now, and there's many member states joining in and becoming kind of like a one state. But they each place still retain their own policies for their own governance and their own laws and etc. But France is one of the prominent players in the political game here. So because they have such a huge economy, and especially their export is the biggest thing. Export goods throughout the world. As you all know, the main things about France, right? Mostly good quality products, right? That's what you know. Like Louis Vuitton, Chanel, Dior, and so on. So those are the luxury brands that they created because they realized that, okay, we need to have a certain standard that we can attract people for our products, because you know China can make it too. China can make everything you can make, but yeah. So because of that, they've been focusing always to keep the French products French, meaning they trying to retain the quality. And well, it's not always true though. But I would say the food is something, especially the wine and champagne. Those produces always maintain a good quality, and probably even in your hometown you can buy the French wine now. Probably more expensive than here. Here you can buy it pretty cheap because they produce a lot, but the more expensive the wine, the better the quality. So it's true. Yeah, so one of the main big exporters also, but we can also count export as tourism. So tourism is one of the factors that drives the economy. It's not the largest ones, but tourism here, it's one of the main things. As you will see later on when we get to Paris, it will be packed with tourists. Of course, since COVID, a lot of things changed, and tourism slowed down, actually stopped for about 2 years. And it also caused a lot of problems for a lot of people, right? Because a lot of people live off tourism here in France, and they have one of the most visitors of any European country or in the world per year. So they had to suffer through this economic problem, and still I think they're still waiting for a lot of people to come back. And so everything goes up. The prices are getting higher here and more expensive to actually live in France. Actually, it's interesting about the French people here that their economic system protects the people here. So it's meaning like if you get a job, for example, if you get a job, then you're lucky. But once you get a job, it's almost impossible to get you fired. So because the laws protect the workers, which is great, but also it's a problem. It's a source of problem, because imagine you have a bad worker and you can't fire them. So French are very good in complaining and making trouble, but very lousy and working hard. So I'm sorry, but it's true. So they are not the most famous hard workers. I'm not saying people don't work hard here, but they are not known well for that, for sure. Yeah, so that's one of the things, because they have the history behind it, is that you remember the French Revolution started it all with changing from the feudal system, from the monarchy to a republic, and to a democracy, a republic and to a democracy later on, which also required the change of attitude and giving the freedoms for people and protection for the people against tyrannical governments. Well, it works most of the cases, but I don't think there is a perfect system anywhere in the world. But that's one of the things, like nowadays is a lot of trouble for the government, that they have to pay also a lot of money for benefits, right? So let's say you lose the job, but you've been working for long, and then now you're getting paid by the government. So it costs a lot of money for the government to maintain these policies. And also in now today's market, the problem is they're looking for workers, but they cannot find them. So it's a kind of a backwards thing, but it's now this time is going through a kind of recession throughout the world. Maybe you already felt the beginning of it, but it's happening also here in France. So people are more cautious about spending, and yeah, so it's slowed down the economical progress they had. Actually, the growth of the economy already stopped many years ago.